Without a doubt, I think it's by far the best league in the world.
How dare you score like that in the Premier League? Mission accomplished in the Premier League. The American.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of ASTV's Premier League show. We are going to do our Match Week 6 recap. We will talk about the big match of the weekend. We will talk about some of the controversial calls in our VAR review. Who knows, maybe we'll even talk about some of our own discourse and discussions we had in the Discord channel. But more importantly than anything, we will start how we always do with a quick, Monday update with our co-host and friend, Mr. Paul Bickler. I see you're still rocking that Lions hat. So Tamishan can give you flack about the rope, the format, and probably wearing it backwards, to be honest. But how are you going to handle yourself knowing that you have to do back-to-back programs tonight? And for a good portion of that, we will be rolling through the first quarter of your football match game.
I think that it's tempered by the fact that I have so much shit that I still have to do for work today that, like, when I'm done with pods, I have to go back to work. So it's like, either way, it wasn't going to be a great time. So, I'll have it on in the background either way.
I was going to say, I'm pretty sure you're not going to miss anything about that match now that I think, or about that game. And for anyone that's watching out there, when we say football, I guess in this case, we were talking about American football. So I'm just waiting. If Richard were here, he'd be jumping in right now. Is it football or soccer? Which I like to call it football, except for when Europeans are correcting me for calling it soccer, at which point I believe it is soccer 110% of the way because, I don't like being corrected. Speaking about people not liking being corrected, the VAR folks.
That's a seamless transition. That was really
another weekend, let me tell you, of just some questionable and crazy-ass VAR decisions and commentary. So we're going to go through it. We know we'll spend some time talking about the Bruno Fernandes shout. We will talk about it in this segment more from the standpoint of what VAR should have done. We are going to spend a lot of time talking about that match in general as our main topic for tonight's show. So let's give our opinions on the actual tackle and that part of it, Paul, when we're talking about the match. Let's talk more about how VAR handled it and what went down and what transpired from the rules standpoint when it comes to that portion of the discussion. So let's start with the Newcastle versus City match. You have basically two areas of really questionable situations in that match. First being Anthony Gordon's awarded the penalty. Ederson wants it to be called a dive. I think some people in the crowd were nervous it was a dive. I think ultimately if it isn't Anthony Gordon, I don't even think it's a question of what happened in this situation. But because it is him and history is warranted, you've got to take that into account when you're, you've done something so many times and been booked for it, I think, more times since his first appearance.
So I don't even know if this is Gordon versus Crystal Palace, do you think they'll look at it?
No.
Yeah.
No, I mean, that's the part. I think anyone's going to question it, but the truth of the matter is if City gets a break from VAR, right, I'm not going to ever sit there and be like, whoa, City. And we'll get to that other whiny-ass team at the top of the table that can't handle themselves when VAR situations happen because their supporters can't ever remember where they get away with something. Talking to you, Arsenal. But we'll get there. Let's start with that one. The penalty awarded to Newcastle versus City. You have an issue with the defenders and Ederson being frustrated, trying to get the referee to go to the monitor. To me, it looked like a pen. I thought Ederson left his leg down there. Does Gordon maybe drag it? Sure. I know people were saying, if it's a dive, it's one of the worst ones ever because he had the keeper completely beat. So why doesn't he just keep running and slot it in? But I think we've both seen enough guys miss that when you go wide of the keeper. And any striker in their right mind, if they feel any contact there by a keeper, knowing they beat him and didn't get the ball, is going to go down. So Is that gamesmanship on Gordon doing the right thing, or is that just a penalty all day and the ref actually gets the call right on the field?
I mean, I just thought it was the right call. And I think it is a pen. And I think, like, I'm fine with, like, players trying to get a referee to look closer at a call as long as they're not doing it like it's not a Mourinho-esque Chelsea side doing it, right? Like, as long as they're not crowding and basically, like, to intimidate a referee, I'm totally fine with it.
Yeah, and I will say, speaking of Mourinho, we need to make sure we give Timuchin some shit later on tonight, because the fact that he used a actual laptop on the pitch to try to get a referee to look at the mistake of a VAR is something only Jose Mourinho would do. Like, he once said he hated the fact that they had monitors on the side of the pitch, and then he brought a laptop to a match official to look at something. Like, it's almost as good as that time. I forget who it was, if it was Tuchel, or it might have even been like one of the crazy, like Alan Pardew's or someone that actually had the printout of an offside on like black and white, and he stuffed it down the match official's shirt as they walked off the pitch. That to me is some high ass comedy shit. So we both agree the Gordon one should be a penalty, is awarded a penalty. So I have to ask you, literally minutes later, Joe Linton is absolutely bundled over in the box. To me, there was less question of that being a penalty because it was a foul on Kyle Walker. So the referee is not going to give that very often, 2 penalties in 5 minutes to the same team, right? We rarely see that happen, but that's what VAR is supposed to be there for. Is this VAR picking up their buddy? Is this VAR not wanting to get pulled into this? Or is this literally, we're the Premier League, we don't give 2 penalties in 10 minutes regardless of what we see? Because to me, the second one was a stone cold penalty on Joe Linton, and Newcastle had a right to feel aggrieved that they didn't have an opportunity to take the lead.
Wouldn't the game be much more interesting if we just had a 10-minute period after a penalty where you couldn't be called for a penalty as the same team? Like, I mean, because that's essentially what happens. And I think in this situation, to me, it looks like the VAR referee feels exactly like the game referee, where neither one of them wants to be put in a position where they make those kinds of calls consecutively against the same team in that amount of time. Like, and I just think that's the unfortunate thing, right? Like, the VAR is supposed to be the faceless audit, right? And I feel like, unfortunately, especially since we always know who's on the VAR duty, like, essentially what happens is that referee just becomes an extension of the first referee and its decision making.
Yeah. So I completely agree with that. I think that the situation here is that the league just has to look itself in the mirror and recognize, like, do we want to get calls right, or are we going to just protect the big clubs and or the referees? Because it feels like in every instance, these questions always come back to who benefits from this call not being made. And in this case, I think it's the PGMOL, it's the not going against City, it's the, these big calls that are coming down to the end of the season. Oh, well, if they get their point, they didn't deserve more. But, for that rationale, City could have bopped one in the last seconds of the match and stole another one, and I think that's my bigger issue with it. So let's switch over to the Liverpool match before we get into the Bruno talk. Jota is awarded a penalty. For me, the Jota penalty is more questionable than the Walker foul on Joe Linton, because I think he clearly comes through the player's back when the player has a step on him. If it's anyone else but Jota, and let's be real, if Jota plays for another team but plays like Jota does, we are screaming as Liverpool supporters that, because the moment the arm goes over him, he just drops to the ground. I mean, he genuinely goes down. I think it was the proper decision because it was called a penalty on the field and the referee felt like it was a foul. I don't think VAR gets involved in either direction, but it is Wolves. So I have to ask you, do they have a right to feel aggrieved in any way?
I thought it was clear. No, and I think it was clear. I disagree. I thought it was pretty clear. Like, it was a foul. Is Jota Portuguese? Yes. Like, but I think like to me, that was really, really clear just because of the positioning. And I know I was reading, it was interesting. I was seeing some stuff online, people that were not Liverpool supporters making the argument that should be a red because it's a denial of the clear goal scoring opportunity because they thought Jota clearly had him beat. Now, I'm not going to go that far, mainly just because the whole double jeopardy thing kind of like eliminates that, I think, for the most part, like now. But I did think it was pretty clear, and I did think it was pretty egregious. Like, to me, like, if that guy doesn't wrap Jota up there, I think Jota does score that.
Yeah, I just question how much of the actual contact was wrapping him up and how much was it Jota felt an arm around him and threw himself to the floor. Because he does get around him and he gets under his head, but he actually, like, does the throwback head and then he throws himself down. And if it's anybody else, I wouldn't question that he'd think he actually had it in him. But for Jota, I actually think he's thinking about these things all the time. And I think that's why we love him so much. That's why he's that poacher and why he pops into the right spots. I think for the fact that it's Wolves fans, too, who watched years of his shithousery, probably made it a little bit more salt in the wounds because they know they've rooted for Jota when he's taken dives before and strikers step up and take penalties.
Yeah.
So I just have to ask you this quick, as a Liverpool supporter, was there any trepidation going through your mind at all when Mo stepped up to take that penalty in that spot, knowing we had just made it 1-1 and we would never hear the end of it if for any reason that shot didn't go in? Because he is, at about 60% of his last 7 or 8 penalties that he's taken for Liverpool.
Right.
You have McAllister and Szoboszlai on the pitch at that time. That arguably both should probably be ahead of him in the pecking order at this point when it comes to penalties.
Yeah, I was going to say, at this point in his career, I'm nervous anytime he steps up to a pen just because, he has been far from, a sure thing on those for almost 2 seasons now.
So I want to quickly touch on the Arsenal situation. They had the one VAR call in that match that could have been questionable, and that was the foul on Jamie Vardy by Saliba in the build-up to the first goal, I believe. Arsenal's first or second. Granted, it's Vardy, so it's lots of theatrics and anger towards the officials. In real time, I will say it looked like a foul to me. I know Steve Cooper was going crazy about it. Other players on the pitch were going crazy about it. Saliba even stops at one point, like he expects there to be a foul called. And then Arsenal goes on and scores. I guess my bigger question to you, Paul, is the check on it took less than 15 seconds.
Which is weird.
Which in 2 different referees said they felt that the goal should have been chalked off for a foul. 2 different match commentators that are former referees. Is this bring more scrutiny and issue towards it's one thing if it's against a small club, but if it's against a big club, it's got to be a guarantee. This club's in the title race, because that felt to me like the type of call City always gets that everybody gets irritated about. Are Arsenal starting to peck into that echelon?
Yeah, for sure. You could definitely use that argument. I personally didn't think there was enough there originally, but I also think that if you're going to look at it, then it's enough. I think the other thing that needs to be sorted out here, and probably the bigger issue, is how far are we looking at things for continuation, right? How far are we rolling plays back on these? Because I think that we're getting into we're meeting a gray area with a gray area, and I think that's the problem. Is I guess I keep thinking back to that Liverpool handball where the play happened friggin' 2.5 minutes before the goal got chalked off. I feel like we need some definition there.
Yeah, I think the whole phase of play thing is just too vague. The handball rules always were too vague. And I think it moves the needle a little bit too far. So let's touch on this quickly in this VAR segment before we get into the actual talking about this match and what it means for United, where they go from here with the manager, etc. I just want to correct it because I wasn't in the Discord with you guys when you're all going crazy. I was watching it. When I first saw it live, I thought it was a red. I went back and forth. I've read a bunch of different things, heard a bunch of different people. I still think you could – I think it's the classic orange card, and I think you can make the argument for either one. So I'll ask you directly on this, and we'll go quick on this one, and we'll get to the match itself, and we'll, I'm sure, talk about the foul and that. But was there enough either on camera and or after the fact to change a call that was called a straight red by two different match officials? And I think that's important. The guy on the pitch gave the red. It was the linesman in his ear who was adamant that it was a reckless tackle, and he was waving the flag. So it's now the linesman is actually taking ownership for calling the red card. And the linesman, to be fair, is the one who actually had the direct angle on the play. And he probably did see it because the ref admitted he missed the tackle itself. He saw the fallout of it. So I guess my question to you is this a situation where the linesman set up the match official to fail by basically not saying, hey, take your time, think about this, let's get all of our ducks in a row, let's let VAR give us some feedback to slow down? Because it feels like the linesman called this to be a red, and in turn the match official went with it, and then VAR was almost hand-tied because they didn't have enough of a clear and obvious error to overturn it. From the application of the rule, does the rule need to change, or do you think these guys blew the call based on what the rules are today? I know that's a tough one. It's a loaded question.
I mean, no, and I think you nailed it. Like, thanks. I don't have a lot to say. No, like I think one of the things that we need to think about is like if like this almost should be like one of those things. Like if we're reviewing every goal scoring opportunity, we should be reviewing every red card. Like, and I know this slows the game down, right? But if we're talking about making these things that are obviously impacting title races in single games, but also multiple games, if it's a straight red, right? Like I think I'd rather see us take the time to get it right and like really have a look at it. That being said, right? So I think the linesman sets the head ref up incorrectly here. I also think VAR is less apt to get involved when they know two match officials have seen this or are both like chatting already. And I think at the end of the day, right? At the end of the day, even if the VAR had called this guy over to the monitor, called him over to the monitor and take a look, I think who was this anyway? Who was the match official again? Was it Kavanaugh?
Yes.
Kavanaugh? Okay. Yeah.
Yes.
Like I don't think Kavanaugh is going to flip that. I don't see enough in it. Like, and I said this in Discord, for me, it's not a red, but I think it's not enough to overturn it. Like no matter what decision you make on the pitch, I don't see enough there that you can definitively say one way or the other. My opinion is that this decision and this call was made on the fact that Bruno A was like for sure beaten on the play. So B, it was like a professional tackle, and C, it was the professional involved. So, which obviously carries a reputation for, obviously being a bit of a prick, right? So I think this is one of those crazy.
Which is crazy that this is his first red card.
Yep.
His first straight red as a United player. Yeah. Yet I would have thought he had like 3 by now. I mean, I think the fact that, I hate to say it, I think the fact that they were already losing, the fact that it looked like he was checked out of the match also plays into it there. I think they think he's getting himself sent off. Like they believe he might actually just be going to injure. He claims that Madison leaned into him as he was walking off the pitch and said, I don't think it's a red either. Madison denies that he ever said that. But, if you ask me, James Madison or Bruno Fernandes, I'm probably not believing either of them on any given day. The fact that so many United supporters and United former players were ready to vilify and basically say it was a red, I think is indicative of 2 things. 1, it was so borderline it couldn't be changed. But 2, that Bruno Fernandes has truly lost all of the positive vibe he had in that United dressing room, both with the club officials, the players. And here's another one, right? This is a guy that they just gave an extension to. And like, there's people saying like, do we want him here at the club long term? Like,
it's like you already made that call.
This is everything they make their mistakes on. So let's get in. Let's look a little bit at some of the matches from the weekend. We're gonna stay away from the United match because we're gonna go to that one quickly. Let's touch on we talked about Newcastle, Man City. For me, it was a really poor match. It just shows that probably we shouldn't play lunchtime kickoffs because they're probably bad across all. It's like anytime you watch an NBA game that starts at noon, you realize these guys were up till 2 a.m. last night. Like, they do not want to be up at noon shooting hoops, right? And it throws their whole system off. I feel like every time I watch a lunchtime kickoff, I always see a shit-ass match. Doesn't matter who the teams are. Like, when was the last time we had a worldie? That's when you always end up with the 0-0 draw between Liverpool and City. They kick off at 12:30 on a lunchtime Saturday.
Those NBA Christmas Day matches are so bad.
Oh yeah, these guys were out. These guys were in Vegas last night at 2 a.m. Now they're trying to play a game in LA at 1 p.m. It's like, come on. So yeah, the only thing they're missing is the hooker freaking handcuffed to LT for practice. And anyone who needs that story, that's a good one. I'll give it on a different day. But Brighton Chelsea, crazy ass match, goals flying in and out. I joked I was watching Goal Rush during the 10 o'clock window, and all I could think to myself was like, man, it's a good thing that the Goal Rush match isn't on Chelsea, because if it was on Chelsea Brighton, they'd have nothing to show us from any of the other matches that were being aired.
Goal Rush used to be like they would clip into matches that were like good, right? Like if there was like action happening.
Yeah, now they do one. Right. Now they pick one feature match,
right,
and show you all the goals, all the red cards. Now, what's nice about that as a Liverpool supporter is every once in a while that feature match is the Liverpool match,
right?
And you not only get all the updates, you also get the British broadcast, which means you don't have to listen to the NBC honks, which basically means you don't have to listen to Jim Beglin hate on Liverpool, even though he played for the club.
Do you not have to listen to Tim Howard fumble through a lineup card?
That's much worse. Chelsea Brighton, crazy ass day. 4 first-half goals from Cole Palmer. Amazing what a one-hit wonder can do in his second year of being one of the best players in the Premier League. But Brighton, was this more about Chelsea figuring things out as it looks like they might be, or is this more about a 31-year-old coach watching a goalkeeper give 2 goals away and still instructing his team to play out from the back? Because Chelsea should have scored 7 in the first half on Brighton mistakes playing it out.
I mean, Brighton could have had 2 against Sanchez too. Like, you know what I mean? I felt like both keepers were like, it's like, guys, we don't have to do this. Like, it was a weird one. I think a lot of this has to do, I'll be really honest. I think a lot of what's happening right now, and this match included, has to do with the transcendent talent on Chelsea's team being so fucking good that he makes absolutely everybody around him better. And I really think that like Cole Palmer is single-handedly like dragged, a Nicholas Jackson out of the gutter. I think he's single-handedly made anybody that they play on the wing next to him better. I think he's like single-handedly put Chelsea in a position where we're talking about them now as a top 4 club. I think he's that good. I think there's still obviously a lot of work for Chelsea to do, but as long as he is consistently in the mix, and they consistently have him there and they don't rotate him in and out like they were doing with Mason Mount, and Mason Mount was that guy for them, they're gonna continue to be there.
So the other match of teams in the top 4 currently, obviously Villa drew with Ipswich Town. Probably disappointing result for Villa. I do think at some point people are going to have to look at Ipswich, though, and actually give them some flowers. Like, they started the season playing Liverpool at home and arguably outplayed them for 45 minutes at 0-0. And then they played City on the road. So in their first 2 matches, in my opinion, they played the 2 best sides in the Premier League. They lost by a combined goal score of 5-0 or whatever it was, right? 6-1 or whatever it was. They have since drawn 4 consecutive matches against decent opposition and fought in every single one of them. And to me, when I look at all these teams, like, I keep hearing people say, oh, Ipswich is going to go down. Ipswich is going to go down. And I do agree in our Discord, Kazi will often say, if you want to win this league, losses don't lose you this league, draws lose you this league. And I think at the top of the table, those 1-goal margins, the bad goal you give up and the 2 points you drop, can really be the difference. And God knows we've seen it twice, losing to City by a point. Arsenal's lost to City by 2 points, and those draws do kill you. I think when you're in the bottom half of the table, draws are what keep you up.
Well, that's what I was going to say. I think it's an awesome quote, but I think if you flip it around and put it at the bottom of the table, it's the opposite.
It's the opposite. And I think that's why I have faith in Ipswich Town being able to find a way to stay up, because I think they'll put in performances, hopefully even buy a player or pick up a player or two. I think they'll get better as the season goes on. And I think they'll steal some wins against the bottom half teams and maybe even one or two scouts from some bigger sides. But I do think they're going to draw enough matches to get enough points, because I think this league is so poor on some levels that a team like them will be able to stay up. But let's jump over and talk about Arsenal and the other bottom-dwelling team in Leicester City. Obviously, Arsenal takes the 2-goal lead before conceding 2 goals. Never in my life have I seen a game that swung quicker at a halftime, though. Like, I don't know what Steve Cooper did. But Steve Cooper did something at halftime, because they literally looked like they were a League One side playing Arsenal on the road in a League Cup game, and then came out of the half and looked like they had the confidence of the Leicester side that went and slayed the entire Premier League in 2016. Like, they had everything from the Mavidi kid to Vardy through the middle. I thought Winks and Skip, though Skip was lucky probably to be on the pitch at the end of it, I thought both of them were outstanding. Is this match more about Leicester running out of gas, not having enough players to see out a big win like that? Or is it more about Arsenal maybe, going 2-0 up, thinking they had the game to rights, Justin hits the worldie, and the next thing you know, they're scrambling like, oh, bleep, what are we going to do? We're going to drop these points. And then they find 2 goals in stoppage time, or one in the 88th minute and one in stoppage time to win 4-2. Who does this say more about, and what does it say for Arsenal's legitimate title credentials?
I think Leicester can take a lot away from this game, right? I mean, given their season, I think you've got to take, they were essentially injury time away from coming away with a draw here, and a really unfortunate own goal deflection there, essentially that happens off just allowing, at that stage of the game, it's like, how do you let a ball fall far post to the shortest guy on the pitch? I just think, a little bit of a brain fart at the end of the match. I thought the amount of injury time they got was really questionable. I thought that was almost begging Arsenal to go win it, which, I was like, I don't ever want to hear an Arsenal supporter complain about favoritism in a match again. Well,
you can't after the Calafiori thing, because to be honest, Leicester has the biggest argument of the whole weekend for poor call. You can't. I don't want to. This is why we didn't bring it up in the VAR section, because it's not a VAR reviewable event. It would have been a yellow. But the idea that professional tactical foul, which would be a yellow card without a yellow, it's just a yellow card. It's a high chop down tackle with no attempt to win the ball and an attacking situation to stop play. He should have been sent off. There isn't any two ways about it. And if he doesn't have a yellow card already, he sees a yellow card there. So Arsenal supporters, please come to the panel show tomorrow night and whine if you want, but you have no bearing or standing whatsoever. So I think Arsenal gets a little lucky. Who did not get lucky? Well, that's Erik ten Hag. So, Paul, as the screen says, God, that guy, man. If I ever see a picture of him smiling, it will be the first picture ever. But is Erik ten Hag's time up at United?
I think it has to be, man. It's got to feel like the last grains of the hourglass slipping through, just because, think at some point, if you're Manchester United, you have to make a final call on this thing, right? I think we all agreed that essentially winning that, cup title last year probably skated him through, and the 2 wins against Liverpool basically gave him a little extra lead. But I think at this point, if you're looking in the season and you've got 2 teams in Liverpool and Tottenham who are your rivals that have come in and scored more goals in your own stadium than you have all season, I think at some point you got to pull the ripcord on that. And it's got to be pretty soon, I would imagine.
And when breaking news happens, I think you break it no matter what time or where you are. So I guess there's no way other than to make a bad joke around it. But Pete Rose clearly bet the under on whether or not he would live to see October 1st of 2024, because he passed away at 83 years old today. So sorry that you passed away, Pete Rose. But to be honest, they're probably popping corks right now at the Dowd family home, because, you spent 25 years shitting on a man's history who died and literally wouldn't admit that he wasn't a liar and a cheat, who called you a liar and a cheat, that years later you admit it was all factual and true, and then took a dump on literally on a whole entire family while they were trying to keep the memory of a guy. So I find it hard to feel bad today, but I will say baseball definitely lost themselves a legend today. Sports gambling lost themselves a legend today. And somewhere someone at a card show is finding out they're not getting to meet Pete Rose for $55 tomorrow morning somewhere in Vegas. And they're probably the most upset because they've already paid. And I'll guarantee that person at that card show is not refunding their money because Pete Rose isn't able to make it. But it wasn't meant to make fun of the man, but it was meant to kind of be fair and balanced. But a big, legend of the world, of the sports world, passes while we're on air. I guess we have to mention it live on the show. Back to Ten Hag here. Heard a couple different programs today. They feel like he's probably just got these next 2 matches in charge, which is Porto this week, midweek, and then Villa on the weekend, purely because they couldn't get anyone else in time. And regardless of these outcomes, they probably make the move next Monday and let him go first day of the international break, giving them the week and a half, 2 weeks to figure out what they're going to do. If that's the case, is this more on Ten Hag for failing, or is this more on the Enos people for just not reading the room, not recognizing he wasn't the guy, and basically not having a legitimate replacement for him after last year's FA Cup and kind of succumbing to the pressure of keeping him because of a win in a ridiculous cup game against a team who didn't really look like they were trying?
I think sometimes, depending on who the club is and what your ambitions are, I think sometimes you have to take a gamble on a manager who is an up-and-coming manager. And I think that's what they did with Ten Hag. And, at the time, I thought it was a really good hire. I think most everybody thought if you're going to get in the guy from Ajax, who at a time when Ajax was absolutely tilting like giants in the Champions League, it makes a lot of sense. And so I thought the hire was good. I thought it was an ambitious hire. I think the one question that we had about Ten Hag coming into the Premier League is how he's going to handle the personalities on that side. And when he was immediately handcuffed with the Ronaldo situation, I thought his handling of the Cristiano Ronaldo saga was was really sort of the tell that this was probably not going to work. And I think everything after that just kind of confirmed it. I think, it seems like it kind of reminds me a little bit of when Liverpool was doing they had the transfer committee, but they were really getting away with it and getting away from it. And you had these weird buys where the committee was buying some of these young up and coming players. And then Rodgers was getting Christian Benteke, right? You had these really disjointed transfers. And that's what it feels like to me. It feels like a lot of these transfers that came in were really disjointed. And I think for Ten Hag is the ones that were his and clearly his have categorically failed across the board. And
maybe Martinez the only one that you'd argue is even serviceable at this point.
Right.
Onana, massive failure. And that's what he wanted. He wanted the ball playing keeper, and he can't stop a shot when he needs to. You could argue that the Malaysia kid, might have a lot of talent, but can't stay fit enough. I also think he's been saddled with poor buys as well, whether it's Eriksen, I wanted Mason Mount, but he just looks like he's absolutely shot. Maybe the injuries. I was a big fan of Mason Mount too. But then again, I was a big fan of Timo Werner and still feel like if he had come to Liverpool at the time we were arguably trying to sign him, it might have ended up being he might have worked out because he actually.
Yeah, I just think it's so
you
hard.
never know.
Yeah, I think it's hard to judge these kids on like how do you know if he's shit or if he's just at a club that doesn't know how to use him and has just completely lost his confidence. And I think, I'm not convinced Mason Mount doesn't go somewhere else and light the world on fire.
I'm not convinced that he doesn't get another manager that figures out a real system that balances the play and puts a balanced midfield, and that he doesn't find his way back into being a true number 8 instead of being asked to play number 10 in a role that doesn't really fit him with strikers who don't know how to play. So they finished 8th in the league last year. They're currently, I think, 10th or 13th in the league. Are currently 12th. They're 4 points above the drop and 8 points off the top. And anytime United has to hear, I'm double the points away from Liverpool and only 4 points away from the relegation zone, especially knowing that they were ultimately, in my opinion, lucky to get a win in the first match of the season against Fulham. They had losses to Brighton and Liverpool at home, back-to-back weeks. Then they go and beat Southampton and Barnsley, and everyone's like, we're back. Then they 0-0 draw with a poor Palace team and go on the road and can't secure a win against FC 20 in the Europa League just to come home and get capitulated 3-0 by Spurs without the best player at the club in uniform for the weekend. I don't want to say where does rock bottom come from here, but I already kind of asked you about the Enos people. So let's do this. We only got a couple minutes left. Let's say they do decide it's time to move on. Who do they replace Ten Hag with at this point? And if you were them, would you be looking for a caretaker manager to kind of right the ship? Would you go with the Ruud van Nistelrooy who's at the club currently, or would you swing again and go for another young up-and-coming manager? Because I don't know that Manchester United has the luxury with this roster and these collection of players to get a non-established manager in.
Well, I think they're going to go with Van Nistelrooy, just based on historical precedent at this club. I think that's what they're going to do. And I don't know. I think it's going to be another Ole thing where I think that he does enough and does well enough where he buys himself some extra time and they leave maybe possibly in the next season, and then it ultimately just doesn't work out. I think Manchester United at some point is going to have to go out and get a top established manager. I just think it's weird to me because when you look at football, I feel like there's less of I feel like 5 years ago we had probably 8 managers that routinely rotated in through major sides and were really well established, vetted managers. And I feel like they've either retired, gone off on the international football, or scattered into the wind in old age. And I feel like we're in this weird transition where we don't have a lot of them left.
No, there's not. I don't think there are. And I always say that to people, who do you want to replace him with? And there aren't names.
Yeah.
I always said, I always thought when he was unemployed, I thought Luis Enrique was the best manager not working until he got the PSG job. After he left Barcelona, had his short stint with Spain, and then when he had the cancer, he stepped down. I thought he was the best big name manager out there. I think at this point, it's probably Tuchel. But I don't see Tuchel coming in and doing the job they want at United, and he'll go in there and play pragmatic football, which will just end up getting booed like Mourinho did as soon as you start losing. So to me, I feel like the other part is they want to be progressive. They want to play, which is probably why they'll go with Van Nistelrooy. I actually think quietly, no one wants to hear this. I think quietly, I think quietly Ole is actually in the frame to come back.
Oh, really?
I do, because I think the people who are still left at the club were the people who had his back. And I think Sir Jim Ratcliffe would like to bring back someone who got the best out of Marcus Rashford and got things out of some of the players left, because I think the next manager comes in will be saddled with the mentality that it is your job to make these players work, not get another 150 million spent. And because of that, I think that person will be failed just like Ole was. So if you haven't already, please get on over to the YouTube channel, hit the subscription button. If you are following us on Instagram, any of the other media channels, please go ahead and give us a like, a subscription, send us messages, let us know how we can improve the show. For Bickler and myself, thank you for watching another edition of the Premier League show. We'll be back next week. Have a great week.